Thank you for joining us today. Our topic for discussion is localizing style sheets for HTML outputs. Okay. Just a little bit about Suite Solutions. I think we'll just go through it again. Our mission is to increase our customers' profitability, and we're with them from the whole life cycle, from the start to the finish, and we know what's with their documents. This is just a short list of some of our customers. Just a little bit about myself. I have a background in computer science. I've been working in computer companies doing various different conversions, styling, HTML, from unstructured to HTML, from unstructured to XML, XML to HTML, all different types of publishing and conversion technologies. And I've been with Suite Solutions since I started, and I've been doing all the list of items that you see here. Okay. Our topics for tonight we'll cover common problems and some of their solutions that we have when we're localizing for HTML, special ANT parameters that are available to us for localization, and special issues with CHM, htmlhelp. Okay. Our first problem is that the toolkit comes with a list of strings for us. And let's say you have a new string that you want to translate. You have a new section. I had a customer who made a troubleshooting topic, so they wanted the word problems, cause, solution added to their documents, and that's not in the OT. Or they have a new language that's not on the OT. And the OT has some 40-some languages, and someone has the 41st language to translate. Sorry. So the toolkit gives us using plugin extensions the ability to extend the strings. Okay. So they're all found in C Dita OT XSL Common is where the strings are located, and by convention they're named with the string, the language, and the locale. Okay. And there's strings.xml which map a language to a specific string file. So you can create a new mapping file, your plugin have a new mapping file that lists your new languages, or even the languages that you're using, to your new files in your plugin, and then you put it into the plugin, and then it'll come in. It'll be available when you run your files. Okay. And this is how you call a string. You say just get, there's a template called getString, and you give it the name of the string. And it, excuse me. Sorry. And it knows based on either the language of your document, or you can pass in the default language what language that string has to be in. And it'll find the right language based on that information and pull it out of the string files. How do I localize fonts? In PDF, there's a mechanism for it. Built into the OT for languages, there's no way that you can add your own CSS. But let's say you want to have different CSS per language, or for different either for fonts or for styling. So you can provide it. You can create you can make a property. You can conditionalize the property for CSS. Right, the property for CSS is args.css. It's args.css. And you can conditionalize it. You can say the value is help.css. It's this value when the language is not, I'm saying specifically not, Japanese. Okay? So I can conditional, instead of just providing args.css, I can go and conditionalize it and say, give me a specific CSS based on the language that I'm in. And then we can go ahead and say, give me the Japanese version of my CSS when the language is Japanese. Okay, so you can conditionalize that property. You don't have to just say, here's your property. You can go and conditionalize anything that you want. Okay, and the same thing with headers and footers. I need to have a different header and footer. I have to have a copyright statement at the bottom of each of my HTML pages. And generally, you want your copyright statement to be in the same language as your document. So you can go and say, you can conditionalize that property. You can have, in this case, we're using the property of args.ftr, our footer. You can do header. You can all of the properties that are available for us. And in this case, I'm saying, if this is French, I want it to be the French footer. And actually, in this case, I'm saying it's not draft. I have a different footer for draft and regular. So in this case, it's not draft, and the language is French. I have either French or French FR_FR. So you can choose which header and footer based on a language also, and that way you get your copyright statement translated. Okay, everybody with us? By default, the strings in all of your language properties are based on the XML language on the root of your topic. Right? In PDF, all your documents are combined into one. So then you provide XML ling once, and it's for the whole document. But here, by default, we don't know what the XML ling on your map was. You really need to go and find what that language is. If you don't. So we have some companies that their standard is only to apply XML ling to the map and not to the individual topics. They don't want to have to go and map each topic. So in this case, you can pass in a property called default ling, and that will be passed in as the default, and that's the language it will use. Okay, there's an extension point. There's an extension point called data.conductor.xhtml.param. Wake up a bit. Ring. Sorry. Okay, there we are. Okay, by default, the dita.ot does not provide this, but you can extend it using data.conductor.xhtml.param, or for Java help and HTML help, you can use, instead of XHTML, it's HTML. And then you'd have an XML document that contains basically this line with the parameter. It's this line here. Okay. By default, the OT doesn't know what the language off the map is. There's code for the FO plugin to go and pull it out for you. We can take that, or you can make a XSL document that goes and runs on the temporary map file and pulls out the XML language and puts it into a properties file, and then you can read it into ANT. ANT can read that property file, and then the property is available to us. That makes sense? Okay. And then once we have this language, we can go and say the language on my map was Japanese. All the files for this map should be considered Japanese just as well. The reason you'd want to pass it in is not only for you might also want to know if you definitely need a language in case you'd have to do any special processing. So let's say we have a customer who says, my UI control for Japanese, I don't want it to be bold. It's not bold. I want it to be a square bracket before every UI control and a square bracket afterwards. So you can test for language. I have a test. You have an XSL if. It's a test. It tests for, in this case, default language, or we can test for the XML lang at the top of the document. And I say, if it starts with JA, then do this. And then that will do a processing. So you could do it on really anything that you need slightly different. And it can't go in your style sheet. It can't go in your CSS. Or you don't want to manage multiple CSS files. You can do it this way. You can put in code to say XSL if and do a test on the language of the current language of our documents. Okay. Right to left support is a tricky problem. It's been a problem for most companies for a long time, even back in Word. So we have two problems with there's not too much work that you really need to do for right to left. It's built in. HTML is a lot more forgiving than PDF. So we can have two problems. We have our left to right phrases in a paragraph within an RTL text do not appear correctly. So in this case, I have my first document. I have my first sentence. It has Suite Solutions Limited, and the period is after the word suite. It really belongs to the limited, okay? And the second paragraph is correct. I got the period in the right spot. We'll see how I did that. I have an LTR code. I have an entire paragraph. It's an English paragraph. I have a whole Hebrew document. Let's say I need one English paragraph in the middle. It might be a quote from a different document or a quote that somebody said, and I have to put that document in the middle. But what's coming out is that it's right aligned. I have this English paragraph that's right aligned, and that doesn't look right. You want your English paragraphs to be left aligned, okay? And I got that in my second paragraph, okay? So we'll see how I did that. Okay. So the causes for these two problems is that when the XML lang is either Hebrew or Arabic, in this case I chose Hebrew just because I can read Hebrew. It also sets on the main root RTL, and that forces everything in your document to be right to left. So if you need a specific part of your document to be left to right, you can tag it. In this case, in my case of my phrase, I wrapped that English phrase in a PH tag, and I said that it's DIR to LTR. I made it a left to right phrase, and then that tag will come through and force it. That attribute will come through, and an HTML will look right. And the same thing with my P tag. I have a paragraph, and I say this paragraph is a left to right paragraph. I don't have to do it on every single paragraph to say right to left. I only have to do it on the things that are specific for English. So those were our common problems and solutions. We'll go on to special ANT parameters for localization. We'll start with EclipseHelp. Okay. EclipseHelp has 3 parameters available for localization. args.data.locale is used solely for sorting index terms. Generally, you don't need to provide it as long as you've used XML lang on. If you put an XML lang on your map, it'll take that. If there's no XML lang, then it'll go to English. So if you don't have XML lang on any of your documents, then you'll have to set args.data.locale to make sure that your index terms are sorted properly. There's args.eclipsehelp.language and args.eclipsehelp.country. Eclipse is nice that you can have multiple languages in the same Eclipse interface. I want to show you a copy of an Eclipse interface that's been translated. And you can have multiple languages, and it will choose the correct language based on your browser settings. So you can set in the browser what the default language that your browser should use, and it will pull it up. So the Eclipse calls all these localization parts called fragments. We're going to go into, if you're coming to we're going to have another webinar next week specifically about EclipseHelp, but just to explain what's happening here. So it's broken up by language and by country. So it always looks at the country first. It always would look at ENUS if it exists, and then it would go to just the language, and if not, it would go to the default. So let's look at what an EclipseHelp looks like. Okay. This is an English Eclipse. It's actually the product. It's the Eclipse Info Center that Citrix has up. So this is their default language. I'm coming in as English, and not only is my document, I have my document set on the left side is my English documents. I also have an English. The whole interface is for English. I have the buttons, the strings are all English here. Now, if I would go to German, take German. Sorry about that. Okay. And now that we chose German off of the language list, my interface is in German, my toolbar buttons, my welcome page, and the list of documentation is in German. So when you have a document plugin, you can provide, if you have I'm just going to close this so that my internet connection is not being eaten up. So when you have translated documentation, you can provide the language and country, so it will already set up all the files that it needs in order to get that in properly. Okay. This is the list of how to determine what language you are. I looked in IE, Chrome, Opera, and Firefox. I could not find it in Safari. So if someone's looking in Safari to try to find the language, I'm sorry, I wasn't able to find it. But whatever value is here is what Eclipse will choose as your default language. Okay. Okay. This is the AMP parameters that are available for other languages. XHTML actually has no special AMP parameters. It doesn't really do anything specialization. There's no index, so it doesn't need to sort. Java help and HTML help out of the box both have args.data.locale available to them. There's a plugin called HTMLhelp 2 by Deborah Pickett, which is used also for context-sensitive help, and also uses args.data.locale, which is also for sorting index terms. Okay, did I get too far? Okay. Deborah Pickett also a plugin called, the next generation of plugins was called the Plus plugin. So there's HTMLhelp Plus, which provides for more localization support. Okay. So you have args.data.locale like the other ones do. And then we have the encoding for the various files. HTMLhelp requires that all your document files, all the files of the document, the HTML files, the HHP, which is your project, the HHC, your table of contents, or HHK, which is your index, all have to be cannot be Unicode. They have to be ANSI of the code page that you want it to be compiled in. So you need your Japanese to be in Japanese ANSI files, or Chinese, or if you want Chinese in Chinese ANSI files. I remember the first time I had to do localized help for somebody. I had no idea why it was going wrong. This was before I even knew about it. Before we did it was FrameMaker, and we were using WebWorks. We had no idea what was going wrong, and we realized that everything was in the wrong language. It wasn't being compiled properly. Okay, this is a list of just code pages by language and region. So anything would have to be converted to the correct code pages. Okay. That's special and parameters for localization. Any questions? Okay, continue. Okay, special issues with CHM. Okay. This gets a little bit confusing. Please let me know if you have any questions. CHM is an ANSI-based program. It's outdated now. Most everything right now is Unicode. Everybody's gone to being very localized. You can have documents be translated, and you want your interface to be translated so people in other countries can read it. But htmlhelp is not. It's not a Unicode program, and it's an ANSI program, and therefore must be compiled as an ANSI program. So everything must be in the correct code page. You have to move everything to the correct code page, like we showed in a couple screens previous. But not only that, the htmlhelp compiler, the one that takes all your files and compiles it and gives you that CHM at the end of the day, also has to be run under ANSI code page. And you can do that in Windows. You can go and set your regional settings. Where's my mouse? You can go to regional settings under your control panel and go and change it. I remember the first time we did, I had to do a localized help. I was like, I have 10, 15 languages, and I went in on a day off and had to run each language and turn off the computer and restart, set the language and restart the computer and do the next language. And if it sounds tedious, it definitely was. Okay. So it's cumbersome if you're compiling multiple help files in multiple languages. I had to do 15 files. At least I had 3 computers to work on. No one was there that day. But if you're compiling off a file server, right, you don't have it on your local machine, or you're working on a CMS, so you have a publisher server, it's near impossible to go and change that setting. No administrator is going to let you change the language on the publisher server for CMS. Okay, so there's a company called SteelBytes. There's a command line program. There's a Microsoft program called AppLocal, but they made a command line program for us, so you can just do a command line called SB AppLocal. It's downloadable from there, and basically instead of calling htmlhelp compiler directly, you call SB AppLocal with the number of the code page. So you give it the number of the code page. You don't use the square brackets. They're just placeholders. You can see where to fill in the blanks. And then you give it the path of the help compiler and then the path of the HHP. And that will compile it for you under the correct code page. And that will ensure that your table of contents, your index, and your search all work properly. Otherwise, they won't. One issue, though, that we found is that the title bar of an HTML help, if it's been compiled underneath a different code page, if you open it up and let's say a different code page, it'll always say HTML help. It will never say your actual title. It'll only say it on the code. If it's a Japanese help file, it'll only show the correct title on a Japanese machine, which isn't so terrible. Okay. That was special issues with CHM. Any questions about what we discussed tonight? Okay. Well, I'd like to thank you for joining us. Trying to get there. And good luck with your HTML. and let us know how we could help you. Be in touch.